What's up, guys? My name is Fari, and I build systems that remove bottlenecks within businesses. And I've been documenting my builds for 117 days now, going up to 365. And in today's video, we're going to be going through the math of scaling and why conversations equals revenue. We're going to be going through revenue as a math problem, how we actively think about this as well, how to basically think about it, which is the next one, and also the different mechanisms that you need to pull, also the mechanisms that we can ultimately gain insights from as well, and also what's within the competitive advantage layer within that. So firstly, revenue as a math problem. I hear a lot of people, and I'm sure like a lot of business owners know this, and Alex Hormozi speaks about this a lot, as revenue as a math problem. How most entrepreneurs treat revenue as a mysterious thing where they don't check their numbers, they don't fully understand what their numbers look like, and that means that they chase clients, random posts, and they hope something hits. So that ultimately means that you're just shooting a lot of things into the air and just hoping that one of them sticks, but not having structure around that, and just having that predictive cash flow, or predictive revenue that comes in each and every single month. And I think that is one of the most important things that needs to be solved, because if we think about business is basically a math problem, and generating revenue is basically a math problem. You ask yourself, how many clients do you need to have on a month to month basis in order to just pay for your baseline, your expenditures? And reaching that threshold as well, you then understand that, hey, I may need 5 clients a month that ultimately covers the costs, or we need 5 recurring clients in a month that ultimately covers these XYZ costs, and that ultimately allows us to break even. Or just understanding that we want to hit this specific goal in terms of revenue, we need XYZ customers and clients from feeding in from different places that ultimately gets us to this goal. But revenue and generating cash flow is a math problem in my personal opinion, because money is math, and if you don't know your math, you'll never scale. And I think this ultimately is a very important concept, especially when you're then scaling, because you need to know your numbers, and knowing your numbers is one of the most important things that ultimately grows a business. A business lives and dies simply by their numbers, and fully understanding their numbers is one of the most important things. So it's all about just taking the approach of fully understanding what your numbers look like, and just being able to fully interpretate that, because that is also going to play into how you're going to scale or invest into the future. If you simply just understand that the money or the revenue or business as a whole is basically a math problem. So how do you basically think about this? And from my experience, at least the way that I've just been thinking about this, is ultimately understanding that revenue is just number of deals times average deal size, with your number of deals being the number of deals that you closed in a month, whether this is recurring revenue that's coming in, or just deals that you're ultimately closing as well, in terms of new clients that are signing up for your service or product. And also the average deal size, so whatever your average deal size, say you sell a deal size ticket for $500, or you sell one for 2K, that ultimately becomes your average deal size, and that ultimately means that your revenue is equal to your number of deals that you close in a month, or your MRR, if you will, or even just understanding that that is your average deal size. But in this case, we're specifically just gonna dive into the number of deals that you're closing in a month to month basis times your average deal size, number of deals. So if you have 5 deals, times that by 5,000 or 500, then you ultimately get your 2.5k. So that ultimately understanding that is a result of that. So then also understanding that deals come from conversations, and this is one of the most important things that I've been learning a lot more lately, that the more conversations you're then able to have and track as well, then more deals come your way. If you're able to have more conversations with different people and just connect with different people, they are also going to have problems that they're going to need solving. So then it becomes a question of, or understanding of, conversations are the unit of product for service businesses. If you're having more conversations with business owners and people that are, key decision makers, then you're then able to understand, what pain points they may have. And if you're also valuable enough, they will see and trust in you to basically solve their problem. And you then start to understand a lot deeper that, the more conversations you have, the more deal flow just flows your way. And this has been something that, I've been thinking about a lot lately, in terms of just increasing the amount of conversations that I'm ultimately having on a day-to-day basis, and also tracking that, because if you're then able to track it, you're then able to understand, what is working and what's not, and also the level of impact that you're having as well. But then you ask the question of what are the mechanisms that you could ultimately pull, which ultimately comes to tracking your pipeline like a system, basically having leads, calls, closed calls, and that leading or tying back to revenue, and knowing your percentages, basically knowing your conversion rates, your average deal size, your deal velocity as well, how quick you're then able to, get one deal to the next deal, how long does it take you to normally close one deal. Say your deal velocity is 1 week, so that makes you understand that, hey, if I need to close 5 clients in a week, that means I need to reduce or increase the velocity that I ultimately sign, a client, because five does not go into four. So then you're gonna have to increase the deal velocity higher than a week, so you can ultimately close, more clients that ultimately, allow you to cover your baseline. And that ultimately means that once you know this, you ultimately understand that scaling is just volume plus optimization. Optimizing your data is one of the most important things, and optimizing, your pipeline as well, understanding how your leads are coming in, the number of calls that you're having, and also the deals closed. So basically your number of deals closed on a month to month basis, and also that understanding that all ties back to revenue. And then that ultimately means that we can look at this, in hindsight, of this insight to say, hey, if you want to hit 20k in a month, then your average deal is 2.5k. That's 8 deals that you need to ultimately have in order to hit 20k a month. At a 20% close rate, that's 40 calls that you ultimately have. So you're closing 20% of those 40 prospects that are coming on a call in order for you to hit, in order to hit that target, which is 20k in the month. And also understanding that at 20% leads to call, that's 200 leads. So these are the number of leads that are coming onto the call, and then understanding that your close rate, if you get 40%, of people actually on the call, and you close 20% of that, that ultimately gets you to the 8 deals that you ultimately need. But also understanding that once you see this, business stops being chaos and becomes engineering. How can you basically engineer your numbers in the manner that you can then predict? Because if you can then predict, then you're then able to scale, because you know your numbers, you understand how your numbers work, and you know what metrics you need to hit on a daily or even weekly basis in order to keep afloat and even to grow. Because if you don't understand, even just one aspect of that, you're not going to understand, once complexity increases. And this is another thing that what problems you're having, or how you were thinking about numbers when you're at 10k a month, for example, are not going to be the same ways that you're going to be thinking about it when you have 100k, when you're at 100k, because then you're going to have more cash flow, and that means more complexity is going to rise, and then you're ultimately going to need to super dial in those numbers. But that ultimately comes from understanding that what is ultimately the competitive advantage layer that ultimately comes as a result from this. And this ultimately comes from saying that, most people guess, you measure, you ultimately need to make sure that you're tracking analytics and metrics and just going super deep. And I'm a big proponent of this, of fully understanding the numbers, decking them out, and understanding that, if we run on XYZ manner, if we continue to run, on the same trajectory, then we're going to get to XYZ place. If we don't improve, or if we don't change something, then we're not going to get to the desired goal. Because if you're then able to ultimately understand, what are the metrics that you need to have, and not just in business, but even in your personal life, like what are the metrics that you ultimately need to hit as a baseline in order to grow, grow, then you're then able to understand how to basically, approach it. You basically re engineer, how you need to attain it, and then you ultimately are able to attain it. Say you wanted to make 100 million. If you wanted to make 100 million and you don't re-engineer it in terms of how many, deal velocities, how many deals you need to close, how you actually going to get there, then you're not going to fully understand how to get there. And that's why most people hope you build predictable systems, which ultimately allows you to then grow, and this then turns sales into an engine and not just a gamble. Because one of the most important things is having these predictable systems that ultimately serve as a function in growing your business and making sure that you're growing on a year-to-year basis, and not just, saying that you're doing guesswork and just saying, hey, I'm going to post this piece of content, and if it sticks, then we might close a couple people. But we ultimately need to make sure that we're measuring it so that it's tangible, that we have results that we can ultimately, use, and also understand the mechanisms that we can also pull in order to get that predictable revenue stream, which ultimately fuels growth and also scaling as well. And if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my newsletter, which I recently just rolled out. It's the first link in the description. And also, if you want to connect with me, X, LinkedIn, Instagram, also in the description. And I will see you guys in the next video.